Welcome back. You're listening to The Hill by Thieves Theater. I'm Gabriele.
And I'm Nick.
And last episode, we related mostly from journal entries and news articles what happened in the aftermath of the arson that killed Mr. Lee. It covered about a 4-week period, mostly the month of June of '92. And it was written contemporaneously, so it gives a fairly accurate and true chronicle of what we were going through.
Well, I mean, what you were going through, I mean, your mental and emotional state of mind was clear, but mine wasn't really made clear.
Right. And, well, it was clear to me and to others that you were kind of having a psychotic breakdown, right? You know, I read a few journal entries last episode that kind of pointed to that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, I didn't really address or answer any of those entries that referenced me.
Exactly, which is what we're going to get at today to give Nick a chance to tell his story versus me telling it for him, right? Okay, so just to refresh your memory, though, here's just one entry from the last time. Nick was so lost since Mr. Lee's death. He was getting increasingly paranoid as the arson investigation progressed. Suddenly he saw conspiracies everywhere, at the Hill, at his job, on the street. Everything was a sign. He walked through the streets for blocks on end with a quarter attached to his forehead, a quarter that didn't fall, a sign. He crossed busy roads without looking, forcing cars to stop for him because he thought he saw Tito after all this time. He said he talked to somebody that was Tito, a sign. One of the production companies renting from Pacific Studios, his job, had changed their name from One Such to None Such. That one was really scary to me,
Right. Because
you were sure that that was an evil sign, you know?
Well, it could have been. Who knows? Capitalism, you know, it's evil.
It could
Whatever.
have been.
Yeah. So it was obvious to you and others just from observing me.
It was scary.
Yeah. A psychotic break. Yeah. Okay. So, but it's going to be difficult for me to relate what I was going through. I'll try as I did in earlier podcast when I was had a similar crisis that happened when I was under distress dealing with my brother Steve's addiction. But I don't classify these events in my life as breakdowns, but as important transformations, mental, emotional, and spiritual markers in my life. The various traumas I experienced in my life have become the basis of most of my writing.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel a little defensive here, but I shouldn't, because although our culture typically classifies these experiences through pathology, in other words, as mental illness, the research in recent years has explored them outside of that paradigm through cultural specific ideas on where spirituality and psychosis sort of meet. They view psychosis, mysticism in a continuum, a la Joseph Campbell and The Hero's Journey.
Right, The Hero's Journey, true. And you know, someone may be, quote, out of touch with consensus reality, but they're actually very much in touch in the mystic realms. Like, for example, in Hindu culture, in Native American culture, which have long recognized all of this. So yeah, definitely two different paradigms, right?
Right. And I see an analogy in the latest Matrix film, the Matrix Resurrections.
Of course you do. Why read Joseph Campbell when you can watch The Matrix, Nick? Right?
Well, okay, yeah. But, you know, the film has a character in it, Thomas Anderson, who is the hero Neo on the red pill, and who is creator of the Matrix video game series based on his faint memories of Neo on the blue pill. So the conceit of the film is that the quote-unquote real world is Neo on the blue pill. So the artist on the red pill who is creating the video game, that psychologically sane person living, creating in the normal world, is not in the real world.
Are you following this? Because I've watched it twice and I still can't remember.
Right.
You have to really study this.
So what he's doing is just reliving or recreating memories from the other world, the true world. Or you could say he's recreating the faint memories of his psychosis, if you go to the other paradigm, right? Right. My memory of this time is also faint. I mostly just see it in flashes. But a few of my experiences and actions I do remember in some detail. So this is sort of the confession of a madman, I guess. And, but I want the hallucinations I talk about classified as the way they sit in my mind, then and today. They're more like the visions that came in historical Christianity, like Moses in the burning bush, right. And St. Paul on the road to Damascus. But also I wasn't a Christian now, so I was studying other religions, especially Native American religions. So there's Black Elk's vision, and especially Wovoka
and the ghost dance.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I was wearing my ghost dance shirt often now, dancing into trance-like states and wandering the streets after that. I was in grief and guilt over Mr. Lee's death, and I started seeing visions, receiving signs.
Right, and you were also very paranoid, Nick, very paranoid.
Yes, everybody was suspect to me, but the saying is, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you. And so we talked about the knife fight that happened just the day after the arson fire, and it was on the corner right outside the hill. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't really a knife fight. It was more just a confrontation. The guy had a knife, and he was coming at me, and Blue, one of my friends who was standing all the time on the corner up there, he slid his knife on the ground over to me.
To make it a fair fight.
Yeah. There were two fire marshals right there. They were investigating the fire. Yeah. And I said to the guy, I didn't pick up the knife. I pointed to the two fire marshals, and he said to me, "I don't care. I'll do time for killing you." Yeah. It was almost like it was personal, and it was his job to do that or something. And he was waving his knife and spitting at me, and but I just stood there in kind of Tai Chi, hugging the tree position, which I was using all the time. And he eventually walked away. And there were 3 or 4 other people hanging out there at the corner. And one of them knew who the guy was and said that he hung out at St. Mark's place where all the stolen goods were being sold on the sidewalk. And he was known as White Boy.
Yes, this white boy thing gets really crazy. Yeah. Because, go ahead.
Well, and he was supposedly a kind of minor league mafia.
And white boy graffiti was all over the Lower East Side.
And the 2 precinct, the police, when I went to the precinct, they had told me they were looking for White Boy.
And they always called you White Boy on the hill?
Yeah, right. I was the strangers knew me as the white boy in the teepee. Yeah. Right. So, yeah, I was paranoid.
With good reason.
Yeah, I was...
Partially, with good reason.
Well, I was a hunter, but I was also the hunted. Yeah. And, following all these tags all the time, seeing White Boy tag up there, what the hell was that about, right? And I think that's where I started my hero's journey. That's where I swallowed the blue pill from the Matrix, and I shaved my head, leaving only just a long tuft of hair at the back. Mm-hmm. So I looked pretty freaky walking the streets. And you, from the beginning, when we put up the teepee, you worked mostly my day job at Pacific Studios. Yeah. So I had free reign to explore the hill and live at the hill.
Right, because it was best for you to do that on the hill while I did all of the other stuff, including my drawings and everything else that I needed the warehouse of your job for.
Right,
so it worked out really well, actually.
Yeah. So I was using the tarot when I first got up there to explore the metaphysics. But my research into the Native American religions and Chinese geomancy, where the hill was the mouth of the dragon. So my metaphysical exploration started centering on the geography, the earth. Well, the city, not so much the earth, but the sidewalks, the streets, the buildings, and all the graffiti. I was looking for signs on the walls and such.
Yes, you were.
And then I was calling on the animal spirits, you know, to guide me. I mean, the squirrel, the big squirrel, the dance I was doing all the time, creating my name, Squirrel, right? And also I was looking to the eagle and turtle. They became important, especially Tortuga, the turtle who was at the center of all the interactions with Mr. Lee that I had. These were the animals I was seeking guidance
But
from.
now do tell, how does this all relate to the Matrix? Very important.
Well, you know, yeah. Well, I was Neo, the hero at the center of the world, the universe.
Of course.
At the mouth of the
Of course
dragon.
you're the center of the universe.
Well, yeah. So my actions would either save or end the world, same as Neo, right?
Yes.
So I never just walked the streets. I walked slowly and deliberately like Tortuga, or I flew quickly from car to car on the sidewalk, you know, Tortuga, eagle, moving down the streets, you know, in my hunt. And one day when I was, well, walking, sort of, in the East Village, a homeless man who was camped out next to a bodega on, like, 2nd Avenue in, you know, 4th or 5th Street or something like that, he was, he wanted to show me something. He was calling me over. It was, he seemed like he was mute. He was unable to talk. He was just using gestures to get me over there. And he took out a black Sharpie and he sketched a figure on a piece of cardboard. The cardboard was about the size of your drawings, your canvas drawings, so like 2 foot by 4 foot. And as he was finishing the drawing, I sat down next to him and started weeping. It was a portrait of Mr. Lee. I mean, your portrait.
I remember you told me that at the time.
I mean, it was only just slightly transformed from your drawing. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But Mr. Lee was in the drawing, not hunched over like in your portrait, but standing erect and holding one hand up as if in a greeting, you know. And I remember 2 people came out of the bodega as I sat there crying, and one of them was pointing excitedly at me and saying, "Look, he's caught another one." So evidently this homeless man had done the same to others as what he had done to me, which is, you know, overwhelm them with the miracle of being able to read their thoughts, their mind, their soul, and detail it in some kind of drawing, you know?
Yeah.
It was just, still sticks in me. I don't remember how I recovered or walked away from that, but it was that same day or maybe the next day that I met another quote-unquote mentally ill person, another fellow traveler on the hero's journey, and the journey through this magic land of spirits and whatever. And he was sitting on the steps of a building in the East Village, and I sat down next to him and gave him a Winston Eagle, you know, tobacco, and had a smoke with him. He reminded me of Tito in his look and his soft-spoken mannerism, and he told me his life story, same as Tito had told it to me inside the teepee. Tito, which I hadn't seen in months, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And he showed me a blue tattoo that was over his heart, and it was the name of his life partner, his dead wife, who still guided him in his journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And 4 letters, L-U-N-A, Luna.
Do you want to know something weird? A quick aside. Our tenant just came down with her 6-year-old daughter. She had a little package that she wanted to show me, ostensibly candy, like sucrettes kind of stuff. And I opened it up, and it was a little bat inside, but its name was Luna.
Oh, boy. Yeah. So, you know, Luna over his heart. And it got me thinking of Mr. Lee again, right? Our Tortuga Luna, Tortuga Soul conversations. I can't remember if I told him about Mr. Lee or Tortuga or squirrel or eagle or anything, but I do remember that we did talk about all the magic and spiritual signs that we were each experiencing and trying to decipher how to read them, you know.
Yeah.
And he told me a story about how he had recently come across a small dog that had been leashed to a tree and left there, and how he had sat down next to it to keep it company, and it sat in his lap, and how the owner had eventually come to retrieve it. And he said to the owner, "Do you know what the word dog spelled backwards is?" And the owner sat down and started crying, you know, when he said that. You know, dog, God, right? Who is man's best friend? Jesus, God, or, you know, the animals we share the earth with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to explain the transformative effect that had on me, just that story. And the story coming from this fellow traveler, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And, but I felt like St. Paul at Damascus when he was struck down by the voice, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Right? And I was thinking of the animals that I had killed in my life. So it wasn't a voice from God. It was just a consciousness of my life. And I realized that I wasn't just seeking guidance from these animals, but also absolution.
Yes, absolution.
All the crimes that I committed against him, you know, during my life. You know, I had...
Yeah, I mean, absolution is a big theme for us, for this entire story. But it's also a theme in our lives because we're vegan. We've been vegan for about 9 years now, approximately, and before that we were vegetarian for a number of years, and it has a lot to do with all of these stories that we're telling our fellow animals on this earth, and that we can't participate in this torture and torture we committed ourselves. Right.
And mostly it goes unseen. It's factory farms. People don't really kill the animals that they eat. They just get them as meat. But I grew up on a farm.
And they don't make the association, but you did, exactly.
Yeah, I grew up on a farm, and so I trapped and hunted and slaughtered all kinds of animals. I remember when I was real young on the farm, I would be tasked with feeding the spring chickens. And spring chickens are chickens that are just raised for meat. There was a factory egg farm near us. And back then, I don't know if they can now, but you couldn't tell whether an egg had a rooster or a hen in it. And of course, all they want was the hen. So 50% of the chicks that were born were worthless to them. So they gave them to us. And then we would raise them as spring chickens, which means that you would feed them for 6 weeks, grain, and then slaughter them for meat. Right?
Name them, probably.
No, they were just, you know, there were like 50 chicks. Yeah. And I'd come out in the morning and I'd feed them. It was nice, you know, because they see me come out and they come running to me.
Oh, God.
And, you know, but then when I was 11 years old, approximately, I was tasked with, you know, with slaughtering them. And that's the memory, that the combo of them, feeding them and then killing them. You know, the chicks that had come up running to me now, I would grab them by the head and snap my wrist, and the head would come off, and the body would be running around. That saying is true. Chickens with
their head running around with their heads.
Right. So you have all these spring chickens running around with their heads cut off, and you know. So that's back then. It was you know, these flashes of slaughter are now haunting me, right?
Yeah.
Back then,
you don't give them any thought when you're raised that way.
No, not when you're raised that way, or not when you don't have a consciousness that I'm now getting from the, I don't know where.
Well, which is what they mean by enlightenment, or awakening, or woke, which
right.
you're not allowed to say anymore now.
No,
right?
but what they mean by
waking up to the horrors in your life. Yeah.
But it's also that you have traumatic memories that you bury.
Exactly.
And they don't come out except when they come out, you know?
Yeah.
When you're going through some kind of experience, crisis or whatever. The most horrific memory I have back then is about snapping turtles.
Yeah, okay, trigger warning on this one, everybody.
Yeah,
Jesus
because
Christ, this is horrible.
we used to trap and slaughter turtles for our own meat, but also to sell. And so you'd put a cage out in the river, and the cage would have bait in it, and the top of the cage would be a little bit above the water line. So the turtle would go in there, and then, you know, he'd be caught in the trap, but he'd be alive because he could come to the surface, right? And then you'd bring the turtle back to the farm, and you'd slaughter it. But the way you do it was you take like a pair of pliers and stick it in front of the turtle. He'd come to snap, and you grab his beak, pull it out, and then chop off its head with an axe, and toss the head to the side. But the head would be there on the ground, and the head would keep moving. The beak would keep opening and closing the whole time you cleaned the turtle. And the way you would start cleaning the turtle is you'd roll it on its back, and there'd be a shell plate on its belly, and you would cut around that plate. And while you were cutting it, the turtle would be fighting you with its feet, trying to stop you wherever you touched it. So it was, you know, very horrific. And, you know, so, you know, Tortuga Luna, Mr. Lee's turtle, was the chief animal spirit I was seeking absolution from, and hopefully guidance from. But also the thousands of other animals that I killed, the mink and muskrats that I trapped and skinned for their fur. Our basement, when I was a kid, was full of furs hanging there drying. And I think I started, again, around 11 or 12 years old, started trapping and skinning the muskrat and the mink were the ones that brought the money in. And when we were on the hill, this was a time when women were, a lot of them had stopped wearing furs because there were activists out there, animal activists, throwing red paint on their fur coats. Yeah. So many of these women were either afraid of getting red paint thrown on them, or they had a change of consciousness. But anyway, they were bringing up their furs to donate them at the teepee, I guess because they thought we were Indians and it was all right for us to have furs. But whatever. And I brought the furs down. Well, there was a room I had found in the abandoned subway line, a tunnel that went underneath the Manhattan Bridge. I found it by chasing down the guy who used to snatch purses and run through the hill, and so implicated everybody on the hill. The cops had come up after the purse was stolen. So I followed where he went, and he went up underneath the structure of the bridge down into this abandoned subway line that went between Manhattan and Brooklyn. And I went down there and I found where he went through the purses and left the purses and things he didn't want discarded. I don't know what I was going to do. I'd wait down there for him, but I don't know what I was going to do if I ever caught him, right? But anyway, while I was down there, I found a room, a big 20 by 20 foot room, like a 12-foot ceiling, and I hooked up lighting in there. The subway workers, maintenance workers, have this lighting fixture that what they do is they put 5 light bulbs together. I don't know if they're 110 or 220 volt, but they have to run it off the third rail, which has real high electricity. They always say, watch the third rail, right? Because it can kill you.
It's a metaphor. The third rail of politics, the third rail.
Right. But anyway, the electric came off that third rail, so this fixture that they made that had 5 bulbs in it, I guess, distributed the voltage. But when you'd hook it up, it'd flare up, you know, like a little spark, you know, big spark. And so anyway, I had this lit up room down there.
Do you know how many ways you should have died during this?
Well, yeah, or both of us, yeah.
I'm listening to you and I'm like, oh my God.
Well, anyway, so the story.
We didn't want to face any of this.
The story is that I was directed to bring the furs down there for my absolution, and I had to carry the furs now from the Manhattan side to the Brooklyn side.
What do you mean directed? Directed? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, not by some voice or but somehow I knew Muskrat.
I was going to mention that earlier. Yeah, Muskrat, what you trapped, also figures very prominently in the Native American creation story.
Right, exactly. So I had trapped Muskrat all these years, skinned him and everything. Yeah. And he tasked me with bringing his furs, the furs of his relatives, you know, over to Brooklyn. And, you know, I was at the center of the universe. And Manhattan to me was Turtle Island of the Native American creation story. You know, in the story where various animals tried to swim down and bring the dirt up to put on the back of the giant turtle to create Earth. Earth, yes. Right, and they all failed, they all died.
That's the creation myth.
Right, except for Muskrat. And Muskrat was able to do it. So he created Earth by putting the Earth from the ocean floor up on top of the
turtle's back.
Right, and so I had to carry these furs for Muskrat over to Brooklyn through, the tunnel was pitch black, and it must have taken me, you know, I was sweating and probably black as everything because I was just crawling through like a muskrat through this tunnel until I got to Brooklyn, and I saw a light. And I saw a light, and I climbed out. And once I was on land, I needed to find a direction or a directive to where to carry, a destination where to carry the fur. And I had some talismans from my medicine bag with me, but I reached into my pocket and I got a quarter, because a quarter has the eagle emblem on it. And I put the eagle, the quarter on my head, the emblem against my skin, and I was looking to see what direction to go, moving my head around, and the quarter miraculously stuck to my head. I said, oh shit, okay, direct me. And so I walked with the furs, with the quarter directing me, with the eagle directing me, and I found a place. It was on the East River, I don't know exactly where, and I can't remember if the quarter fell off there or I just knew it was the spot, but I laid the furs down next to the river and set them free. And I always carried these days, I always carried a unique umbrella that I had bought in Chinatown. It was just a foot long, and it fit into my back pocket when it was folded closed. And I brought the umbrella out when I thought that someone was hunting me. Right? And I'd put it over my head and walk. And so I brought the umbrella out to walk back to Manhattan.
Any relation to a tinfoil hat?
Well, I guess tinfoil hats are supposed to keep thoughts out or something from aliens, or, you know, to keep thoughts away.
I actually don't know what they're supposed to do.
Well, I don't either, but I think that's what they're meant for, to reflect things away from your mind. But I was trying to bring thoughts in, so I don't think, you know. But I mean, a lot of people were looking for White Boy. And the ADA Gold Bomb, right?
Green Bomb.
Green Bomb, right? And you know, Spencer, the drug lord, both of them, and the corrupt cops who were working for either one or the other.
Right.
So they were all looking for a white boy. I was looking for a white boy, but I didn't know whether I was the white boy they were looking for. So I was under the umbrella a lot of times when I was walking and in the shadows during the day. So I guess all this sort of gives a picture of what my mental state, my spiritual state was at that time. And the final stage of the hero's journey is when, with some ease or difficulty, one or the other, the hero exits the world of magic and myth and returns to the ordinary world. And I can't remember whether the exit was easy or difficult. I knew it took a long time.
Yes.
And I, in some ways, you know, neither one of us really exited the hill.
I was going to say, it took at least 32 years so far.
Right, to relate the story here.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, we did leave. My journal entry, let's see, it was Thursday, June 25th, 92. Mr. Lee died May 29th. So about a month after the arson, we ended the last episode by reading that. I just want to repeat it quickly. I went back home and slept by the front window closest to the house door for a while, wanting to be sure I would hear Nick coming home, but he didn't come. A few hours later when I awoke, I went back to the hill. Nick was in the teepee, crying, afraid, lost. So my next entry was not until 6 months later. But I recounted 6 months later, you know, deciding I needed to keep writing and to not drop journaling. I needed to keep up. So I wrote 6 months later what happened at the end of that day, where I found Nick lost and afraid and crying in the teepee. So I wrote, later that day, we took down the cover and the drawings, leaving only the poles, gave our few belongings away, and left the hill for what we thought would be the last time. We knew we were balancing on a precipice and that it was necessary to leave. Slowly, we began a new life. We did middle-class things like buy a new car. We fixed up the apartment. We went away on weekends. We tried desperately, I remember this, to shake the feeling that it was too late, that we probably had HIV meanwhile, or that we would lose each other, that we would be punished. But the hill continued as before. Sometimes we would drive by it. The poles were still there, skeleton-like. Right.
It must have been during these 6 months that I recovered or ended my journey, my hero's journey.
Yeah.
I had been graced with 2 visions that I'll never forget. One was of the 2 of us standing on the cliff of Turtle Island. It was not really us, but us as aboriginals, or Adam and Eve, looking out over all creation. The journey was over. The world had been saved. And the other vision was of Eagle and Turtle, who I had been asking. Yeah,
this vision we later made another teepee out of, a memorial teepee to Mr. Lee.
Well, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that later. But yeah, the design came from this vision.
Right, and we made a film about it called Tortuga Crawl, just a little bit before we started working on this podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think we should end, I want to end the episode with part of the narration from the film and maybe the tribute or homage you did for Mr. Lee.
Yes, yes. So you go ahead and read the film's narration, or pieces of it at least.
Right. Mr. Lee lived next to us in the hut he had built. So the turtle pond was midway between us. Although Mr. Lee spoke no English, only Chinese and a little Spanish, we would have simple animated conversations every day about Tortuga. One continuing argument was, Tortuga belongs to the sun. No, no, no. Tortuga belongs to the moon. We siphoned electricity from the city street light, and I hooked up a large aquarium aerator in the pond so that the water would freeze during the winter. But once we had to be away from the teepee in the shantytown for 3 weeks, and the pond with Tortuga in it froze over. And Mr. Lee's and my argument turned ontological. Tortuga is dead. No, no, Tortuga is alive. Because they can pull their head and feet, all their flesh in, except their tail, into their hard shell, snapping turtles have only one natural predator besides man. The American eagle is large enough, strong enough to grab hold of this snapping turtle by its tail and fly up into the air. Dropping Tortuga on a hard surface on a boulder from a great height, crack opens his shell, exposing the flesh. Although the fire happened near dawn, Mr. Lee would have normally been outside already, as I would have been, except that I hadn't slept in the teepee that night. When I did arrive there at 8 a.m., half the shantytown was in the black rubble and 5 or 6 police detectives were standing around. Walking up and around the partially burnt teepee, I walked right past Mr. Lee without noticing him. I asked one of the detectives, "What's going on?" There had been dozens of fires on the hill in the 2 years we'd been there. Firemen always arrived, but never police. Somebody died. The detective turned and pointed. A few feet away was what looked like a mannequin. Bits of clothing, but no features. Amazingly, the charred, dead body was still standing in a half crouch with outstretched arms, resembling a Tai Chi pose. It was Mr. Lee. I fell to the ground. I fell even deeper into some recess of my soul. The pond ice melted almost simultaneously to Mr. Lee's death, and when the giant turtle crawled out of the water, I crawled with him. I vowed to follow the spirit animal to wherever he led me. In the following days, to those who knew me, they saw someone who was in psychosis, but I knew then, as I know now, that my guilt and grief was demanding a necessary journey. Eventually, I was given the vision I had sought and would follow for the rest of my life. I saw Eagle grab Tortuga tail, attempting to pull his prey into the air, but Tortuga held fast to the earth. Time froze, and then earth and time were pulled backwards in the great struggle. I had carried Tortuga to Prospect Park Pond to release him. He crawled into the water to swim away, and now, with the strength and truth of my vision, I began my crawl back into the past and forward into the future. Mr. Lee had called his hut the House of United Nations, so I knew where I needed to go. But my journey to the United Nations building on 42nd Street would be difficult, especially because it would need to be a Tortuga crawl. Difficult physically to crawl the 4 miles, but also difficult because of the scrutiny that the crawling would attract. So the least populated, safest route would be nighttime hours along the East River. I've been collecting turtle emblems over the past 30 years. Sometimes I forget why I collect them. Regret and grief often haunt silently, even as they so purposely guide one's life and destiny. Yeah, so go ahead, I guess, read your tribute now.
Yes, I wrote this tribute to read to all of the residents on the Hill when we had the ceremony after his death, and then I also read it to the press who were waiting at the perimeter, which we told you about how that went down last episode. So here's the tribute.
Did you read it or did Margaret read it?
Margaret read it because my hands were shaking so much I couldn't hold the piece of paper. I was in bad shape too, in different ways than you, but Margaret read it, yeah. We are standing in the ruins of Mr. Lee's home. Mr. Lee built his home without sawing boards, without piercing nails, without pounding a hammer. It was built in silence and without violence. His home, a fantastical creation of carefully chosen treasures from the streets of this city, all lovingly knotted together with brightly colored ribbons and cloth, was not simply his shelter from the elements. It was his spiritual sanctuary, his temple. Every morning he began the day with a meditation upon his temple. He was often seen sitting on his roof, painstakingly retying, rearranging, and adding to the visual feast of images, speaking all the while in a mixture of Cantonese and Spanish. He would write Chinese characters in volumes on the skids and cardboard and mattresses that graced the outer walls of his temple. Names, many names, invitations to queens and messages to beholders were the occasional translations. Once satisfied with his work, he would leave to return again at dusk. He always carried with him a bag of precious belongings, dozens of snapshots of smiling people, religious symbols, remnants and discards from the lives of others, and 5 handmade, handwritten passports, speaking of hundreds of wives, thousands of children, and many more grandchildren. Mr. Lee had no family here that we knew of. We learned from him one day that he was born in China, grew up in Cuba, and fled to this country during the revolution. Did he have to leave his family behind, mother and father, wife and children? Did he dream of one day being reunited with them? Was his heart full of them? We were his neighbors here. We came to the Hill as artists, wanting to erect a memorial to those massacred at Wounded Knee and to the disenfranchised of today. We had come to learn and to explore our lives within a structure that was also both home and temple to a people once, a people whose body of knowledge and wisdom was so great that it should have saved the world. Instead, it was decimated by the lethal combination of arrogance, greed, and ignorance. And it just never ends, does it? Mr. Lee, you taught me the meaning of the word artist. I will strive all my life to incorporate what you have taught me about patience, purity of purpose, and devotion to the truths we carry with us somewhere in our hearts. The knots you forged extended far beyond the confines of your temple. The power of your bonds brought the 3 of us together. It united your other neighbors who were proud to show off your creations to the many people who shared the fascination with your incredible home and wanted to know the man who built it. You quietly created your own world among your neighbors here on the Hill, possibly the only community anywhere that was able to welcome and coexist with an extraordinary soul such as you.
All right, next episode we'll talk about when and how the shanty town finally came down and what happened to the people, the residents there, as far as we know.
All right, again, feel free to write us on this or any topic at podcast@thievestheater.org. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening to The Hill by Thieves Theater, and if you like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you know when our next episode is out.
Check out our website at thievestheater.org and follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at TP on the Hill. That's TIPI on the Hill.
Thank you, as always, for listening.
Thank you.
See you next time.